Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
Exceptionally well, Rory, yourself.
I'm never better. I'm chipper is the word. Chipper.
Chipper start to episode 117. You've tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and we've got a packed episode for you today. Starting off, we usually cover 3 topics on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and the first topic we're going to be speaking about today is, are the core conditions necessary and sufficient? So in the textbooks, we read core conditions necessary and sufficient, but are they really? And I can hear the controversy building up before we even go into that topic, Rory. Topic 2 today, we're going to delve into practice matters, where Rory takes an element of practice. And today you're going to be sharing about working with clients who are on prescribed medication, Rory.
Yes, and through our practice time, we're going to meet clients who may be prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, or drugs to help them with anxiety. And I'm going to talk about what we need to think about if we have clients who are taking what would be called psychotherapeutic medication, and how they may present and what we may have to think about as therapists. So watch out for that. Listen out for that.
Yeah, looking forward to that one. Stay tuned. And we're going to be ending today's episode by speaking about our third topic, and that is counsellors who have tattoos. And it's an interesting topic. It came from our Facebook page. We'll tell you more about that when we get to it, but you're definitely going to want to stay tuned into that. Even if you don't have a tattoo, you want to have a listen to this one. It's a really interesting topic. But kicking us off today, are the core conditions necessary and sufficient, Rory?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question, and it's one that came up in our Facebook page. And if you don't know where our Facebook page is, just type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook. Use 2 L's in Counselling Tutor into Facebook. You'll find our closed group. Knock on the door. Of course, we're going to let you in. And there are thousands of like-minded people in there. There's students, there's qualified practitioners, there's supervisors, there's some tutors in there. And every so often, some interesting questions come up. And someone asked that they'd heard that the core conditions weren't necessary and sufficient. Discuss.
Yeah. Well, what we're basically speaking about here is that the textbooks, they kind of allude, and we will read again and again, necessary and sufficient. The core conditions are necessary and sufficient to bring about psychological change. But it is contested, and I think that there are critiques of all models, and I think that the critiques need to be welcomed. They need to be looked at, and I think we need to look at where we are in history, when that was written, where we are today, and does it still stand? I'm gonna sit on my opinion for a moment, Rory, and hand over to you.
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things with the core conditions. First of all, as I've mentioned before, the core conditions weren't actually, Rogers didn't actually state the core conditions. It wasn't his phrase. It was his students, Karkoff, who used the core conditions for social work. He took empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard, and transposed them onto social work. There are actually 6 conditions. But in terms of the core conditions, which most people in therapy know about, being non-judgmental, being empathic or empathetic, and being real and genuine in the therapy room, what Rogers was doing with those was separating himself from psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis at the time was the classic kind of Freudian person who kind of stayed away from the relationship and was just an observer of the client's process. So it really drew a line in the sand, the difference between psychoanalysis and person-centered therapy. Are they necessary and sufficient? Well, certainly they're necessary, I would say. And all modalities really use those as a base. Even if they don't call them the core conditions, they use them as a base. And I was talking to my good friend Bob Cook, who's a transactional analyst, and he was saying that in the kind of late 2008, TA took what was called a relational turn, and they built in as an idea. It's not a school, it's just an idea that you need to have some form of relational connection with the client. And I can safely say that Charlotte Sills, who was one of the pioneers of this, drew a lot from Rogers. So are they necessary and sufficient? Well, I think they're definitely necessary. And sufficient is a tricky one. It depends on what the client's coming for. If the client's coming for, say you get a client who's got a fear of flying, then person-centered therapy may not be a good fit for that client. They may need a more structured way of working. They may need to taught techniques. So in that case, they wouldn't be sufficient. The techniques would be useful as well. But as a base to start from, they are the base. They are, that's where you start from. And then everything else is built around that. And there are some people who, of course, argue that Rogers wasn't against people using other techniques. He was saying you need this in place first.
Yeah, and there is definitely a part of me that agrees with you. I certainly have those conditions present in my therapeutic relationships, and so many people coming into therapy, that is sufficient for them. That is all that they may need. Just having that soil of a different kind, being accepted for who they are, for maybe the first time in their life, seeing genuineness and realness in another human being who is really 100% integrated and there and caring about them and their journey. That can, in some instances, be sufficient. But I think, as you wisely said there, Rory, it depends who that person is and what they're bringing into the therapy room. And we can't just take one stamp and say this is the be-all and end-all for all people, because there are people that will need more. There are people that will need psychological education to feel okay about what they've been through, the traumas that they've been through that they blame themselves for. There is so much more to it. And it's interesting, I like the work of Mick Cooper. He writes a lot about this in his research into pluralistic counselling. And on one of his articles that he writes, he says, let's start with the necessary, which means those first three therapists provide conditions along with the three relationship, the client conditions. Are they necessary? A resounding no comes from the evidence. And what he goes in to say is basically that the evidence shows that they don't necessarily have to be there for a therapeutic change to take place. A person can have therapeutic change from just diarising all by themselves if it is suggested. And he refers to online therapy where you can have asynchronous communication, which basically means communication that's not taking place in the here and now. So we're not, as you're listening to this is synchronous. It's happening as you're listening to it. Asynchronous is an email. So it's sent at one time and read at a different time. And emails have evidence that clearly shows that they can be therapeutically beneficial for some people. And there's no person there. So that there is an argument to say that the empathy is not there, that connection is not there. But I guess that there is a similar argument that says that the empathy is there in the writing of that email. So it's an interesting topic indeed. Yeah,
and quite with respect to Mick Cooper, who's a esteemed researcher, quite hard to evidence. Rogers himself said, I think, that it was quite hard to evidence empathy. I think that it's the base of any face-to-face practice. It's the base of it. And it's really interesting. A few years ago, I had a friend who had some difficulties in life and had CBT. And I said, how did that go for her? And she said, well, it was all right. She said, but it was really nice being listened to and heard and listened to without judgment. And she said, that probably did me more good than the techniques I learned. So, take from that what you want. But I do think that as a base, it's always useful. And certainly it's my base in my practice. I start from that position. And I don't really stray that much from it, if I'm honest.
And I can certainly relate to that. And I think within my own practice, when I do kind of stray from it or bring in other elements, they are brought in with those conditions firmly rooted within them. So they're delivered and worked with that empathy, with that unconditional regard, and being totally integrated and clear as a person, myself bringing it in. So I guess they get woven in there. I think that what is interesting is Carl Rogers was a man of research. He certainly was a man of research, and I wonder if he was around today, and if you asked him again today what his thoughts would be with the new research that has been done. And you only need to look a few podcasts back on the Counselling Tutor podcast, and you'll see our episode where we spoke about the research and the importance of research in counselling, the research informing what we do as counsellors. And there has been so much research. There continues to be so much research. So to cling firmly to one concept and be unmovable in that, maybe fixed in that, I guess we maybe need to ask ourselves, is it wiser to take in the new research, look at what's happening, and compare it back time and time again?
Yeah, and I think if you're in training, the only caveat I'd have with that is if you're in training. Yes, if you're in training, it's the basis, and it does take some time to distill and to fit into you. And I would say don't rush that. That is why a lot of training starts off with the Rogerian model, because it is the very base of how we engage with clients. So if you are in training, just engage with that, use those core conditions. There's good evidence to say that person-centered therapy is a valid therapy and works. You don't need to put anything else in. And then once that is established and maybe you've qualified, then, as I've said in other podcasts, then you can go on and look for what else your clients are asking you for. And there's your CPD, and there's the way you develop and integrate and kind of blend your practice. But if you are just training, stick with the knitting, and you won't go far wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good caveat. As you were saying that, my head was bobbing up and down profusely, because it's kind of like they say in theatre. I worked in theatre for many, many years. You don't break the rules of theatre. There are certain rules. You would never have the curtains open and have your back to the audience, is a rule in theatre. However, if you know those rules and you've practiced those rules, you can break them with great effect. But you need to understand the basics and the rules first. And you're 100% right. Those conditions need to be studied in great detail, and they're not easy to get your head around. So often we hear from students, how can you truly practice unconditional positive regard? We've done whole podcast sections on, can you truly be non-judgmental? And it's tricky. It's difficult to get your head around it. And you're 100% right, Rory. If you're in training, stick to what the textbooks say, stick to what you're being asked for in your assignments, and do it that way and practice it. Get a good grip of it before, of course, going out into practice, flexing your therapeutic muscles and bringing on the other information, adding it to that very firm base. And I go back to what Rory started with. You look to most therapeutic models, they have these conditions woven in at some level. They may use different names, so we do need to know them if we're studying, and we need to know them well. Wow, what a topic. And we're so grateful for the topics you bring up. Please join that Facebook page, as Rory mentioned, Counselling Tutor. Get onto it. Tens of thousands of like-minded people. All the good conversations take place there. And of course, as practicing therapists, one element is a massive element. In fact, the element is being in practice, sitting in front of a client. And that's where they say the rubber meets the road. And we have a section called Practice Matters. And Rory, today you're going to be speaking in Practice Matters about working with a client who may be on medication.
Yes, it is interesting. Many years ago, I was teaching a cohort of level 4 students, and one of my students said, she was talking to her supervisor about working with clients on medication, and what the supervisor suggested that she asked the client how they felt about that. And there was a big debate in the group. Oh, we shouldn't do that, and medication, and it was something new. And sometimes when some new ideas come in to counselling groups, it can disrupt the energy a little bit. And we had a long discussion around when people use, when people are on things like Prozac or, anti-anxiety medication or antipsychotic medication, how it might kind of inform the therapeutic relationship. So I'm going to give you an overview of that and give you some work to do. I'm going to give you a handout with some links for you to go and do some research so that you can be better informed if your client presents and says, I've just started on medication or I'm on medication, I think it's really good to have an idea of that. And certainly ethical bodies are now saying that all practitioners really should have an overview on what medications do.
All of that in Practice Matters after this very short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Working with clients on medication. At some point, we as therapists are more likely to encounter clients who are taking prescribed psychopharmaceutical medication than ever before. The reason for this, I believe, is twofold. Mental health as a conversation in society is becoming louder, which in turn raises awareness and normalises people's distress. Secondly, though there is still a lot to be done around removing the stigma which surrounds poor mental health, individuals are more likely than ever before to access help, be that medical, therapeutic or spiritual. So what do you need to be aware of when working with a client who is taking medication to support their mental health? How do you engage with clients on the topic of psychopharmacology and counselling? So the first thing I'd say is consider your own views on medication. This is not about your view of the world, it's about the client's. It's harsh, but it's true. Clients may well ask your opinion about going on to antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication. The best response to this is to explore with the client what is informing their choice and their views about it. The second point, it's possible a client's mood may change when starting or coming off medication. Most competent doctors understand that medication may have side effects either initially or long term. This may include lack of appetite, loss of libido or sex drive, flattening of mood, or inability to feel deep emotions. If a client experiences these symptoms after starting on a course of treatment, sometimes it's helpful to ask if the physician explained any symptoms connected with the medication. And if they didn't, you could ask them if they read the leaflet which comes with the medication. That can always be helpful. I've known clients who've been given medication and haven't been told of any contra effects, but they're always in the leaflet that comes with the medication. The third thing is supporting a client who asks for a medication review. Now, sometimes clients may feel uncomfortable asking their GP for a review. If this is the case, be supportive and normalise the process of consulting with a doctor to review medication. It really, really, really isn't unusual for some medication to be prescribed. It not suits the client, and then what happens is the client goes back, a medication review is undertaken, and they may be put on a different form of medication or a different dosage. So, some clients may be reluctant to speak with the doctor because their word is law after all. But helping them and supporting them to get a review can be really useful. The fourth thing is we practice in a mixed economy. A lot of our clients will feel the benefit of receiving therapy and taking medication. This is the reality of modern practice life. I have a dear friend who's has suffered some trauma in his early life, and he had a lot of therapy. He's in fact a practicing therapist. However, still takes anti-anxiety medication because of the way his brain has wired up through the years because of the trauma. And he finds both the medication and the therapy really, really helpful. The fifth thing and final really is be open-minded. I know there are some strong views for and against medication, and there are very few times in life where only one solution is to any problem. Usually we find there's many solutions to a problem. So part of the process, I think, is develop a balanced view on research. And in the handout, I've put some links into some authority sites where you could get a balanced view on medication.
Thank you as always, Rory. So important to have an understanding, to study further than just the theory that we learn, to understand how our clients may be presenting, what the medications do, the different names of the medications, how they act and interact. I guess we started today's episode by speaking about Carl Rogers and saying, are those conditions necessarily sufficient? As you pointed out, Rory, there's 6 conditions, and the first of those is psychological contact. Without psychological contact, the theory states there is no therapy. So we need to be aware of the medications, how they may affect the therapeutic relationship. And of course, you can get Rory's super duper handout for free. All you need to do is go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. That's where it all happens. That's where you get all the good info from. counsellingtutor.com. Right at the top of the page, click on our podcast tab and make your way to podcast number 117. That's today's podcast. We've got show notes there, we call them, which is basically a précis or a summary of what we've spoken about in today's episode. Lots of links in there to relevant materials that relate to the topics that we cover. And right from within that page, you can get Rory's super duper handout on working with clients on medication. Free of charge, just pop in your email address and we will send that to you. And of course, if you are already a member of our paid for service, which is called Counselling Study Resource, well, that handout has already been added to your handouts vault. So moving on to counsellors with tattoos. I've got some tattoos, Rory.
I didn't know that, Ken.
I know, I keep them hidden.
Well, I have to declare an interest here because Mrs. Counselling Tutor, and she'd kill me if I said that, if she hears that. My wife is a exponent of body art, so she is a canvas of body art, and I think it's really interesting that is the name now that has really taken common currency. The word tattoos has a very kind of negative connotation, doesn't it? But body art, and there's body art studios all over. I just drove past one today on my way back from dropping my wife off to work, and I went past I think 2 or 3, and it's really interesting. And this topic did come up in our Facebook group, where someone had been for an interview, and they'd been told that their job prospects may be limited. Because they had tattoos. The actual quote was that you probably work with children or in a free charity, but paying clients really wouldn't want to see a client with a therapist with tattoos. And I was absolutely stunned at the closed-mindedness of this statement. And I don't really see a problem. You look in our society today, and lots of people have body art. I think the only difficulty may be is where people have maybe difficult tattoos. And in the UK, there's a TV program called Cover Up, where people come in and show tattoo artists their kind of mistakes they've made with tattoos, whether it's an old lover's name or something a little bit more graphic, shall we say. And that might be difficult. And of course, there are tattoos that have hidden meanings. Would you know what 1488 meant, Ken?
1488 sounds, with it being a number, that it may be gang related, but I have no idea.
1488 comes from something called the 14 Words by a man called David Duke, who's a white supremacist. And 88, of course, is the alphabet for HH, Adolf Hitler. So we've got to be thoughtful. I've seen certainly people who've got hidden meaning tattoos, and I think that can be quite a difficult thing. But yeah, and I just want to share this story. When I was in training, I worked in a camera shop, and there was a guy who used to come in. He was a lovely man, and he had love and hate tattooed on his knuckles. And I always thought, I wonder what he does. And after I was leaving, he said, "As I'm leaving the shop, I've qualified now." And he said, "I've just finished my PhD." And he'd done a PhD in environmental. He was going to be a doctor. He's going to be a doctor, and it just proves, doesn't it, that sometimes you just cannot, you cannot judge a book by its cover. So yeah, I haven't got a problem with tattoos, and I really don't think clients have either. I think in general, I don't think clients have, unless of course someone turns up with a complete face mask. But even then, if they're nice people, doesn't really matter, does it?
Yeah, tattoos are very interesting, and if you look back at the history of the tattoo, you're going to find that it's very tribal, that it was used to mark the person's position within a tribe, their hierarchy within a tribe, and they came into culture. I remember my granddad showing me his tattoo that he got in the Navy, and it was like an eagle on his chest, and I was fascinated by that as a young man. And then I grew up in the 80s, and tattoos were at that time kind of frowned upon. They were something that you would keep hidden. They were not something that you would openly show in public, and as you said, Rory, there was judgment around them in terms of who you were, the past life that you must have lived if you carried these marks on your body, and it did affect people's views on how people saw people and job prospects, as you said there, Rory. And then something really interesting happened here in the UK when David Beckham got a tattoo and then went out and showed it openly on the football pitch. And all of a sudden, the mindset changed. It was almost overnight that tattoo parlors started springing up around the UK with people wanting to carry these tattoos and wanting to have it done. And it is exactly as you said, Rory, became body art. The original tattoos were done with needles, 2 needles, ink, and it was done with a stick, and the needles were at the end of a stick, and they would bounce the stick on the person's body, and it was very inaccurate. The lines were very thick and blurry. The ink technology was not developed, so the inks would fade, they would smudge, there was seepage within. But what has happened now, of course, the little electronic devices, so much research done into the inks, and it is now a fashion statement that so many people proudly wear. And I think, we study equality and diversity as counsellors, how we do not judge a person by the colour of their skin, their religion, or by anything, but by their sexual choices. And the same is true, I guess, at a level with if somebody chooses to decorate their body in any way, whether that be body jewellery, body art, whether they choose to cut their hair in a certain way, dye their hair a certain way. I think if we as counsellors are making a choice, making a judgment on that, then there's definitely something to take to supervision. But I can understand that a client may not have the training, and they may hold a prejudice, they may hold a thought that is bad, or I guess at some level they may judge. And I guess there is the trickiness. So I carry a number of tattoos from my journey through life, but I have chosen to keep them covered specifically during client work.
Yes, and I think that's a choice, isn't it? I think that's a choice that people make. And you could say anything. I have a beard. It might be you get a client who doesn't like people with beards, or someone who's rather rotund. That's myself. And you cannot legislate for every client choice. It might be that someone doesn't like your accent, might think you're too posh or too common. So I think it falls in that remit. Ultimately, it's a person-to-person endeavour, counselling. And if the person sat in front of you, you can relate to and get on with, then, I think that's really where we're at. What a fantastic episode. We started off with, are the core conditions necessary and sufficient? And we had a good investigation into that. Then we went on to Practice Matters, where I talked about working with clients with medication. And finally, we ended with counsellors who have tattoos, the wonderful world of phenomenological body art. And Ken's showing me his tattoo. I can't. It's on his arm. There we go. It's on his arm. So there we go. And, as always, hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website, at www.counsellingtutor.com.